Hello, and thanks for joining another episode of the Blueprint Roundtable. I've got Chuck Brotman and Lizzie Wood with me today. And the question we are going to be talking about or the topic is, why can peer interviews miss the mark during the interview process? So, Chuck, I'll start with you to get your thoughts.
I mean, the reasons they miss the mark can vary, but oftentimes it's as simple as companies not really being thoughtful about why a peer to a potential hire is being brought into a process to begin with. So, first and foremost, whoever you want to bring in your hiring process, it's really important that you've defined their role in the process and what competencies and behaviors that you want them to inspect and how they plan to go about doing it. And if you're inviting someone to, join an interview simply to give someone insights into the day in the life and see what you think about them in the process. Are they a culture fit? If you're giving someone vague guidance, you get out of the process what you put into it. And if you're approaching things in a unplanned and sloppy way, you're going to get sloppy results. And a potential peer who may report to the same person who will be hiring this candidate is obviously going to be a little cautious about challenging why they're being brought in. Nobody wants to be insubordinate, right? So it's really important in these situations that you're providing good guidance on what they should be assessing for. You should be using an ATS to store responses. You should have questions defined in advance, and you should have some definition for any interviewer of what a great response looks like versus a mediocre one. So, I mean, it mostly comes down to that. Obviously, if a company has some deeper issues politically, if a peer, for example, may not be bought into the hiring altogether. I mean, there are things that can happen where they may actually be subverting your goals and representing the company well. I don't think that's often the case with most companies, but that certainly can be an issue there as well. But so I think fundamentally, when peer interviews miss the mark, they miss the mark because the process is not well defined and the peer does not know what they're assessing for. And even if you're bringing someone in to mostly assess for values and culture fit or alignment, that still needs to be defined. There still should be some thought into the questions that are being asked. There should be some training to make sure that they know how to mitigate bias in the way they're assessing people and are not inadvertently, looking for folks who simply demographically resemble them, but really, approaching it in the most objective way possible. That's in my experience, it really comes down to that. But Lizzie, maybe you've seen different sides of this, or might disagree altogether.
Yeah, no, I think that peer interviews can be a good thing and a bad thing. I used to do peer interviews when I was an SDR, and I had some guidance into it, but I didn't know exactly what I was getting into when I first did my first three, let's say. I think the biggest thing is why they go wrong, piggybacking off of what Chuck said, is there's no training almost into how to run a peer interview. Like when you're assessing these candidates, the peer interview is almost to see, okay, how are they going to act with a potential future coworker? Like, are they
Right.
going to be still the way that they're interviewing? Or are they going to be different, act a different way? Are they going to come with questions? So on and so forth. So I think that if you prepare the peer and give them the proper interview training, which can literally be 30 minutes, 45 minutes, I think it can be a success. I think where it can go wrong is the peer may sometimes reject someone based off a feeling like, oh, I feel like they're not a good fit. Well,
Yeah.
we can't disqualify someone just based off of you feel like they're not doing a good job. Like we need to understand what questions are asked. Did they seem like they were excited about talking about the culture? Like, did they ask questions about the quota? Did they want to see how our CRM works and what do our sequences look like? Did they ask questions about day in the life and KPIs?
Right.
So I think that is where it can be a pro, but also it can be a con too if they're just not properly prepared for it.
Yeah. I think those are all good points. Also, too, I think sometimes one of the reasons peer interviews can miss the mark is sometimes hiring leaders will bring in a peer to try to kind of catch a candidate off guard and to like find gotchas, right? Like, hey, I've got some suspicions about X, like see how they approach this. And I think in general, like when you're bringing in, a potential peer in the process, everything should always be transparent. You make the most
Yeah.
rigorous assessments when you're transparent. Like it's never a good idea if you're bringing somebody in because, you want to, get somebody when when their guard is down and ask questions surreptitiously, right? Always be on the up and
Yeah.
up, but make sure you're putting thought into that. That's how you run a properly rigorous process.
And I think too, just adding on to this, like in my opinion, the peer interview is supposed to be a little bit more laid back. It's supposed to be a time where the candidate can feel a little bit more comfortable. They're no longer interviewing with someone who's their potential boss. They're meeting
Yep.
with someone that usually is equivalent in some sort of age. Usually you're about to either make a lateral move or this is going to be a step up and you're learning from someone who could potentially be your mentor. I remember when I was interviewing for an SDR role, my peer interview ended up being the person who was my mentor all through my training. And then they ended up getting promoted to an AE role, which was great. So then I got to see, okay, I had literally one of the best SDRs at the time being my peer and then my mentor. So it's supposed to be more laid back. It's supposed to be a fun thing. But I think if it's too laid back and they're not properly equipped, and also they're not, like Chuck said, bought into the product, bought into the company, they're not invested in the culture. I think that's where they can just go completely south.
Right. I mean, it's like, I think you could extend from that, right? It's like a good learning for all
Yeah.
interviewing is that everybody should aspire to make candidates feel comfortable. Chris, you talk about this. Everyone should aspire to make candidates feel comfortable. And you're right, peers, you know, and tend to do that more often. But maybe this does beg the question: if you're bringing them in for that, like, why are you running your initial interview grilling them, right? Why are you not making
Right.
people feel comfortable as if you were a peer, right? So, all interviewing should be, aimed to, understand talent, to run the deepest, most thorough assessment to represent your company well and professionally. And part of doing that well is making people feel comfortable. And you shouldn't lean on the peer to do that because you're not capable or willing to do it yourself, right?
Right. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. No, those are excellent points. I mean, everyone you interview, you should look at like this could be my hire. I could be around this person. You want them to have a good experience. And when people are comfortable, they will show you who they are, right? At some point in the interview process. We've seen that a million times, right? Like you don't have to do all these tricks and mind games. Like they will show you if you're asking the right questions and you have like a defined process. But
Yeah.
I just think we're so narrow, and this year specifically, searches are narrow as far as that. I want A, B, and Z, and X, Y, and Z, and the unicorn as well, right? And so you already have a much limited, like smaller candidate pool. So make sure that before like you want to go in and grill them, that you're sure that they're not your person, right? Because those days of grilling are really gone. You can still do it, but companies and hiring managers don't have that leverage that they used to have. And so that's a whole nother topic for another time. But all that to say, be thoughtful about how you do it because this can be something that's very positive and successful. So
Yep.
that is all the time we have today, but thank you for joining the Blueprint Roundtable. Don't forget to subscribe to our series on YouTube or blueprintexpansion.com, and we will see you in the next episode. Thank you all.